Welcome to Unapologetically ADHD. I'm Patricia Young, MSW, and I'm an ADHD former therapist and current coach.
I'm Alex McLaughlin, MSW and LICSW, and I'm an ADHD therapist. This is a podcast with two friends processing what it's like to live in body minds that diverge from neuronormative standards and everything that comes with it, the good, the bad, and the beautifully messy.
We aim to release 2 or more episodes per month. This podcast is not meant to be a substitute for help from a licensed mental health practitioner. Hey there, welcome. Hey Alex, how are you?
To be honest, I'm pretty tired and kind of low energy, so yeah, that might come across in our recording. So I wanted to let you all know. How are you doing?
I have a client's voice in my head that goes, I am okay. That's not my voice, that's my client's voice. I've had a rough couple of days of just, I told you I kind of powered down. So my energy has been very inward and feeling pretty overwhelmed with a lot of things that are going on. But I'm glad to be here today. And I think it's important for us to be able to show up no matter how we are and just know that that's okay. That's sometimes how we have to show up in life if we're not able to take time off to take care of ourselves and we don't have to show up shiny, perky, happy all the time.
Yeah. I've also considered canceled Friday because I was very fatigued. I considered canceling again, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. But, maybe that would be the self-compassionate thing to do. But I was like, I don't know, maybe I will feel more energized once we start recording.
Yeah. Why don't we do a check-in at the end and we'll see?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard for me to know. Sometimes it's very clear when I need to stop, and knowing when I need to push through and stop sometimes can be very challenging.
I agree.
Yeah. We are going to pick up episode 3 was about OCD, and we're going to do a part 2 today, and we'll see how far we get if we want to do a part 3 or not. We don't know yet. So Alex, why don't you continue talking about some of the facts about OCD?
Yeah, so I think I left off with sharing about how long it takes for someone to get diagnosed. And then the next fact I have is that OCD affects 1 to 3% of the global population. According to one study in 2024, another source estimates about 1 in 100 adults, or between 2 and 3 million adults on Turtle Island, colonized as the United States, have OCD. And then about 1 in 200 kids and teens, or around 500,000, have OCD on Turtle Island, colonized as the United States. At one point in time, OCD, there's a statistic that floats around about how OCD was ranked by the World Health Organization as in the top 10 of the most disabling illnesses. Looks like that was the OCD UK cited that in 2018. So I've seen that statistic thrown around a lot. It just sounds like maybe that's not where it ranks now. I'm not quite sure how the WHO ranks that, but anyways, those are some facts to start us off.
All right, sounds good. And were you going to tell us a little bit about your OCD journey?
I have had OCD since I was a kid. One way it showed up when I was a child was I would have to take my stuffed animals or put them on the bed the same way each morning, and I would situate them so they were kind of in a triangular fashion. And then when I got up in the morning or when I went to bed, I'd have to put them on the floor in that same exact way every day. And now this could very well be an autism thing, kind of needing that routine, having that security in that routine. If I wasn't able to do it, or if I felt rushed, I would feel very anxious, and I don't know. So I'm could that have been OCD? Could that have been autism? Who knows? Yeah, another way it showed up is that I used to have these I'd get mental images in my head of like my family burning alive when I would like get ready to go to bed. And it would be like, oh, if I left this light on, am I going to cause my family to burn alive?
Mm.
And of course, like that's scary for a
Yeah,
kid. It's scary for anyone, but it's
sure.
scary, especially for a kid. And I didn't really tell anyone this was happening. I just kind of was like, ugh, I'm just gonna turn the lights off then. So I'd like
Hmm.
compulsively, check the light switches and things like that. Yeah. And then as a kid, I also had some contamination stuff. So using barriers in public restrooms, using barriers when touching things, needing to like use hand sanitizer excessively, would be worried that I would spill something, or like if there was something kind of in a walking path and it was something that I pass by and I see it, and then I maybe get a mental image of like me or a family member being like seriously injured or dead because we tripped
Hmm.
over something. So I'd just had a lot of like harm OCD show up. And I would, yeah, also get like when I started driving, I'd get mental images of myself like crashed off the side of the road. And so, yeah, I assumed back then I was like having suicidal ideation, but I think it was OCD
Mm.
producing these like disturbing mental images of
Hmm.
myself like driving off the road. And then I'd be kind of scared to drive because of
Yeah,
it.
of course.
And then into adulthood, some of those same things still persisted, like the harm OCD, being worried I'd be the result or I'd be the cause of someone being seriously hurt, including myself, harming people emotionally. I did a lot of checking, so checking locks, stoves, schoolwork, notes. I would like reread and rewrite things, and I would like rewrite my notes in high school until they were perfect.
Mm.
Like I remember like being like, oh, I didn't like how this one thing looked, or like this doesn't flow well, so I need to rewrite the whole thing. And I would just spend way too much time doing that. Yeah, a lot of reassurance seeking, a lot of just right OCD. So just, needing things to be a certain way. And like this shows up too in like needing to be efficient, quote unquote. And like I will
Hmm.
reload and unload the dishwasher if it's not in my mind efficient, whatever that means
Hmm.
to me. You're laughing and smiling. I'm guessing you
Hmm.
relate.
Can I interject for a second?
Hmm.
Yeah, tonight I was putting a couple things in the dishwasher, and I have a belief about how the dishes should be put in, and my husband does it differently. And I paused for a moment to think if I wanted to put them in the way that I believe that they should be put in. Tonight I didn't. But yeah, very relatable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like feel like, I don't know about you, but I feel like part of that needing to be efficient is like an autism slash maybe ADHD thing of like
Hmm.
kind of that feeling like we need things to be efficient all the time.
Hmm.
And that very much, for me at least, can turn into OCD.
I, for me, some of that too helps with decision fatigue. That if I
Mm,
mean, even in the shower, I've thought through about what is the most efficient way to do things in the shower. And then I don't have to think about it because this is just how I do it. And so I think it also helps with decision fatigue. And when I have certain activities, I have certain clothes that I wear the night before I put them out, not for everything, but for certain activities, because it just helps me to not have to worry about all those things. So I'm just agreeing with you with examples.
yeah, that's a good point because I feel like that is true for me too. Like I have the clothes in my closet arranged a certain way. But I guess it's like a little bit decision fatigue, but also, or it's a little bit reducing decision fatigue, but also like if I know where things are and I know where to expect them, I'm spending less time
Hmm.
trying to find what I'm looking for if it's clean. Like I can
Yeah,
easily just look in my closet into my t-shirt section and see, do I have this red shirt that I was thinking of wearing today? Because I know where it is because I
sure.
have a system.
Hmm.
Yeah, another way this OCD has shown up for me is with somatic obsessions. So I had what I'm now assuming is an MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome reaction to the COVID vaccine,
Mm-hmm.
where I had anaphylaxis. And then I had anaphylaxis to the flu shot a few months later. And so then I would start to get very, like, anytime I had a somatic experience that was similar, like if I felt short of breath, I would start to worry that I was having anaphylaxis again. Or
Of
if like my
course.
heart rate was increasing, yeah, or like I was getting itchy. And so I do a lot of like mental checking of my sensations in my body and then like Googling things. And then when I started on Adderall, first I started on immediate release. And if anyone's tried that, that can kind of give you some, like, your heart rate can increase a little bit when you first start it. And so
Mm-hmm.
I was worried I was having a heart attack.
Mm.
So, that was not fun.
No.
And then I don't really talk much about this very publicly, but I've also had some like pedophilia OCD come up too, especially when I worked. I mean, I still work with kids, but like, I feel like it got kind of real bad at one point when I was babysitting a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would just like not feel like I couldn't even like touch them in like an affectionate way that's like appropriate. Like if they needed like a hug, I would feel so uncomfortable giving them a hug because like,
Mm.
these intrusive thoughts were coming up, or these
Sure.
obsessional doubts, and it's like those are not in line with my like what I desire, what I value. And so, but
And
I
your
just
behavior.
right,
Yeah.
right, yeah. And so, but then I worried, like, well, what if I am actually like a secret pedophile?
Yeah.
And now I know that that's just OCD, right? But
Mm-hmm.
at the time it was kind of scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. How did you get diagnosed?
Yeah, so I actually had a friend that was diagnosed with OCD in, I want to say maybe grad school or right after grad school. And then they were kind of talking about their experience with OCD. And they're like, I think maybe you might want to look into this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked a therapist at the time, and they were like, no, I think it's just your PTSD. And then maybe like 2 or 3 years later, I ended up actually seeing a therapist through NoCD, which is an app where like you can get OCD therapy. And I saw a therapist through there, and they actually diagnosed me with OCPD, so obsessive compulsive personality disorder, because they're like, oh, well, you like the perfectionism is like what was making them think it was OCPD, and like how I would kind of like need people in my life to engage in the rituals too, and was, for lack of a better word, rigid around certain things. And
Mm-hmm.
in hindsight, it's like this was autism and OCD presenting.
Sure.
This is not a personality disorder. Yeah, but then I ended up doing like a, intensive care for PTSD. And then when I was doing that program, a lot of my exposures were not really related to my trauma. They were related to OCD,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the day-to-day exposures. The prolonged exposure, was obviously rooted in the traumatic memory. But yeah, so after that I was like, huh, I do wonder, maybe I do have OCD. Yeah, and then I saw a therapist after I discharged from there who diagnosed me, and then I ended up going back to Rogers Behavioral Health, who I did the trauma program through, because now that my trauma was better, my OCD like really took hold. And they're like, oh, I have space now. I can be really, really haywire. And this was
Mm-hmm.
in 2021, I think 2022. So it got kind of bad. And by kind
Mm-hmm.
of bad, I mean like pretty bad. Like my life was very small.
Mm.
I was just going to ask what your journey has been like.
It's still unfolding. I suspect that my mom has OCD. And without knowing that, I think a lot of the sterile hygiene things, especially around food and meat preparation and cleanliness and keeping things cold, which I just thought everybody was like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to know. And then it's interesting because my husband and my boys are, they're of the philosophy of like, you can still defrost meat on the counter and things don't have to be refrigerated after they've been cooked. And so it's been a little, I saw that little, I don't know what to call it, a reaction on your face.
Nose crunch. I don't know. It felt like
yeah,
my
nose scrunch. Perfect. I wanted to just say snarl, but it wasn't really a snarl, the nose scrunch. Yeah. And like my husband, we have two different mayonnaises because he likes to keep his mayonnaise in the door. And that is just so not okay with me. And I prefer to eat a different mayonnaise. So I have my own mayonnaise and it has its designated spot far at the back of the fridge.
Like in the door of the fridge, he keeps it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We've talked about it. And he's like, I've been fine so far. So I'm like, okay. Not a battle I'm going to fight. It wasn't until I had some pretty significant relational problems with a close friend a year and a half ago. And I was working with my coach, and my coach was the one that said, I'm wondering if you have some OCD, because I had just been diagnosed autistic maybe a little over 2 years ago. So I was identifying a lot of what is OCD as autism. And I think that there's a crossover. I think some of the things are autistic. I think some of them are OCD. But it was helping me identify that need for order and sameness and routine. But it definitely shows up in relationships. And then recently, I was telling you, Alex, before we started recording tonight, that what I'm seeing for me is when I have situations that involve attachment injuries for me, and there's been something going on in our neighborhood with a group of people, and my husband and I are not included now. That's pretty much all I'm going to say. But that loss of community and belonging activated attachment injuries for me, which in turn activated my OCD and the looping thinking about the situation and what I'm going to say and how I'm feeling and flip-flopping all over the place. And then I ran into two of these people unexpectedly and surprisingly, had not had 57 potential conversations of what I would say if I ran into them. I had nothing. And then what I'm seeing now is that once that OCD gets activated, one of the ways that it's showing up is with a lot of food preoccupation, whether it's thinking about food, wanting to eat food, watching things about food, getting food. It's very interesting. And having had a history of what was labeled an eating disorder and living in treatment for almost a year inpatient for an eating disorder, I'm kind of re-looking at all of that and looking at it in a different way. And as a result of this, I have been on OCD meds. I was able to reduce them when this relationship issue that I talked about first started. And I've increased my meds, reached out to my psychiatrist and just said, hey, just giving you a heads up. And then I realized on Friday, I realized how preoccupied I am with food. And I think because I've experienced it so many times in my life that it didn't register like this is not your baseline anymore to be this preoccupied. So I'm going to see her on Wednesday and see what we can do, because this is just another form. And I find myself doing more counting. I will look at catalogs. I will look at things and count, like if I could have as many things as I wanted, what would I want? So just doing things to distract. And I suspect that not feeling well the last 4 or 5 days and then just sort of powering down was also a way of like, I've just had enough of the world, not feeling suicidal, but I'm just done. I kind of want to power down and not be available. And I mean, I'd still walk the dogs and did the normal things, but wasn't socializing and was really just spending a lot of quiet time to get my nervous system as calm as I can.
Yeah.
And I have those thoughts of harm when my kids would leave and drive back to school. I always had terrible visualizations of awful things that would happen to them. And we could watch them on our apps to track them when they got home. And even while you and I before we recorded tonight, I was saying the room that I'm in my office, we just moved it around. I live in a very old house and it slopes. And where I'm sitting now in the room, oftentimes my chair will just start to move by itself because the slope is so bad. And I've had these thoughts of like, what if the floor just opens up and I fall through? And you're like, sounds like an OCD thought to me. I'm like, yeah, I was just kind of wondering about that, that it's not uncommon for me to have catastrophic thinking about things. And when my boys were little and I would carry them from the car to the house, I had a very graphic thought of what could happen as I was carrying them. And I've just gotten accustomed to like having terrible graphic thoughts about what could happen and going, oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's funny that like that becomes normalized, kind of like you were saying with the food stuff. Like at a certain point, we just think that, well, and you were saying earlier, even with like the contamination with meats, like we just kind of, if that's how we're raised and or socialized, like that is the norm, quote unquote, to us. But then we think that other people experience this similarly. And so we don't really think to question it because we're like, well, we've always lived this way, or like this is how our parent or parents, raised us, or this is what they demonstrated. So like, doesn't everyone else have these worries or these like really horrific graphic images in their mind? And it's once you start kind of talking more about it, you come to realize that no, actually, not everyone has these these violent images that pop in their brain.
Right. Right.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about like postpartum OCD, and that's not something that I'm like it's not like a specialty of mine, but
Mm-hmm.
do you know, I guess, do you know anything about it? It sounds like you experienced it a little bit. So I guess I'm wondering if you feel like speaking to that at all, or
I don't know that I have a lot to say. I did not know that I had OCD at the time, and it's like 25 years ago now. It's been a while. I just know that that one thing specifically, I always had very graphic thoughts about. And I also wanted to circle back and say thank you for your vulnerability about talking about the pedophilia OCD. And I'm seeing some people that are close to me how that shows up. And I'm confident that I've had those thoughts before too. And I think that they just feel so kind of terrifying that I'm just like, I don't know that I've even allowed myself to process it and just kind of push it away. So thanks so much for being vulnerable there.
yeah, of course. Thanks for being gentle with that share, and also for sharing that you've had similar experiences too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think talking about it hopefully just helps people feel less alone
Yeah.
and realize that, okay, maybe actually there's not anything quote unquote wrong with me, for
Yeah.
having these thoughts, because it doesn't mean that I have a desire, right? I think the more we can kind of bring light to these quote unquote like taboo.
Yeah.
I don't know if that word is, I'm like, now I'm like, ooh, is that word like culturally?
No,
There's
don't
probably
know.
there's probably some things
Yeah.
around that word, but
Yeah.
um
I was working with a client for something that was not OCD related, and they had been and they were getting worse. It had episodes around specific things, but they had been in a religious position for the majority of their life and started having these very intrusive thoughts that went counter to their religious beliefs and how they'd lived for so long. So it was incredibly disturbing to have what felt like, everything that you're not supporting coming up. And so we stopped and they found somebody who was able to work with them. But I just think that would be so upsetting and disturbing to start
mhm.
having intrusive thoughts that pretty much violated what you dedicated your entire life for.
Yeah. And
Mm.
we often say in the OCD world, like when someone is having obsessional doubt about a certain topic, it's because they care so much. Like OCD attacks what we value. And so if we
Mm.
value being someone that is kind of follows like religious or ethical guidelines, if we really value that, then OCD is going to attack that, and it's going to make us question.
Mm.
And there can be like, I think in ICBT, I want to say it's like thought fusion, or There's like types of fusion beliefs. So if it's like, well, if I go the extra mile, that means I'm a hard worker. If I pray 5 times a day, that means I'm devout.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can be devout without doing something that's excessive, but OCD will attack something we really care about. So, like in pedophilia, if we really care about kids and taking care of kids and like, right, showing them love and care and all of that, all of those good things, then OCD might attack that. And so one
Mm.
way I like to think about it is like, okay, you really care about this thing. Like OCD is showing us how much you value this thing or behaving in a certain way.
I love that. I wondering if, especially for, I could be wrong, but I'm just going to throw this out there. Those people assigned female at birth that also have trauma and tend to be people pleasers, I would imagine that that could get tied up in the reassurance seeking in a way that looks very socially acceptable. That behavior can either be very difficult to be around if you're with someone who's always trying to get reassurance, but I also think that there's a nuanced way that that can show up that looks like it's good communication and it's trauma based with people pleasing and reassurance seeking. I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is a really important point, and I think it's also important why we explore culture when we're exploring like any type of neurodivergence, OCD included, and exploring like how culture or family is reinforcing the OCD. Because yeah, it will like we're socialized to take care of others and to put others' needs ahead of our own and to like check in with people and to caretake. And so I think it does reinforce a lot of if we're prone to OCD or have like a predisposition, because OCD can be hereditary. And so yeah, if we're prone to it and then if we have trauma, right, that's gonna just probably make it rear its head even more. But yeah, I think that's a really great point you make.
Well, thank you. Is there anything about our OCD journeys that you want to talk about before we move on to the next thing? Do you want to talk about what you did to help with your OCD that you found really helpful?
Yeah, so I will say that there's an OCD screener that people can take kind of on their own. It's called the OCIR. So it's the OCD Obsessive and Compulsive Inventory Revised. And we'll put a link for that in the show notes. But there's a screener you can take for free and just kind of see like, do I maybe have some inklings of OCD? And I will say that it's really important when assessing for OCD that you're working with someone that is an OCD specialist, because like Patricia and I, like it took me 33 years to get diagnosed. I've had it since I was about 6. Like it took a very long time to get diagnosed, and I assume for you even longer, which just highlights like how misunderstood OCD is even in the mental health field. Like I didn't know enough about OCD as a therapist in training. Like,
Yeah.
so that said, I think it's important to work with an OCD therapist to get properly assessed. And so there's a few different types of therapies that are evidence-based to be shown effective for OCD. One of them is called exposure and response prevention, or ERP for short. This is where you kind of expose yourself to doing something your OCD or anxiety is telling you not to do. So when I was at Rogers' OCD program, I would like touch the doorknob, for example. I would maybe start by touching it for 5 seconds with my bare hand, and then I was not allowed to. So that's the exposure, is exposing myself to the thing that produces anxiety or OCD. And the response prevention is preventing myself from engaging in a ritual. So I was not allowed to then hand sanitize after touching the doorknob. So that's what I started with. And I did Rogers for, I don't know, probably like 4 or 5 months. And I was there, every day. I first started in like the day treatment. So that was, I think, like 6-hour days, or, I'm doing exposures 3-4 hours, probably a little bit more out of those days. And yeah, I mean, my OCD, I think, was in like the very severe category, like the highest category you can be in when you take the Y box, which is the Yale Brown obsessive compulsive scale. And this just measures like the severity of one's OCD. So my OCD was in like the highest category it can be in. I think it's maybe actually extreme. It was the highest category. And then I think it went to moderate, which is like quite a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some other OCD therapies, but I want to pause there and see if you want to speak to kind of what your healing journey has looked like with OCD.
My coach used ICBT. My coach is also a therapist, and we did coaching. And because it was so new to me that I can't tell you much about it because it was just integrated into my process. I was thinking about something, and I can't remember where I read it, but there was a place that did exposure therapy, and they would make, like, people that had contamination OCD, they would make them lick the toilets. Yeah, that's just like, that's a big no, thank you.
Yeah. And like, in ERP, we might go to an extreme, like we might do more than we kind of have to overcorrect. And so, right, but then there's an element of like, we don't want to put someone in danger. Like if they're licking a toilet, like we know that there's unless it was cleaned, and we know it was cleaned, like, right, there is like an ethical responsibility that the therapist is not putting someone in like clear danger.
Yeah.
Yeah, but one exposure I remember doing an outpatient, so just with like a therapist, was like touching a granola bar to a trash can and then like eating it. And like such feelings of disgust would come up. Or like leaving a mistake in an email and then sending it anyways. So do you want to talk about what ICBT is?
No, I think you should.
Okay.
You have better words than I do.
I'm like, do I share, or do I gently challenge you to share?
I honestly don't think that I could talk about what ICBT is. I really don't. I think that you have, and I mean this genuinely and not in an OCD way. I think that you are able to language things much better than I can experientially, and being able to tie things together and make connections. I think I do a really good job at that, but the descriptions of things, not my strength.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think you've mentioned like some of the technical language you have a harder time with.
Yeah.
And find it boring. So
what? I'm sorry. Just kidding.
Oh, that's funny. So ICBT stands for Inference-Based Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And this is where, so if ERP, we're kind of addressing OCD from like a behavioral perspective. With ICBT, we're trying to address OCD from a cognitive perspective. So we're looking at, if we think of OCD as like a magician performing a magic trick, ICBT is learning the magic trick that OCD is using in order to persist, in order to be created in the first place. And so it's learning to recognize OCD, recognize when we're getting pulled into the OCD bubble, and learning like the tricks that OCD is using to keep us engaged and pulled into that bubble. And it kind of combines like mindfulness, acceptance and commitment therapy, and like CBT therapy. So it combines a few different types of therapies, but we're using what we call our sense information. So like our 5 senses, but also like what we know to be true about ourselves and what we know to be true about the world. We're using that information to come to like a logical conclusion. And we're not necessarily with ERP, the goal is to try and sit with the uncertainty. And with ICBT, the goal is to ground in the present moment and to ground in our senses in order to kind of proceed forward without getting sucked in and pulled into the OCD bubble.
It's interesting, that concept of the OCD bubble, I did not resonate for me. And I'm not suggesting this for anybody. I'm just sharing my own personal experience, that I ended up conceptualizing my OCD as an old crabby man named Edgar. And I could tell when Edgar was trying to get at me. And I think that that was the equivalent of being in the OCD bubble. And that just helped me to conceptualize. And it's so interesting that my OCD got so quiet for so long that I think I was meeting with my psychiatrist and I couldn't even remember Edgar's name, because I had this really nice period of relief where, this area is like playing the whack-a-mole game. Okay, got this one down, and then whack-a-mole comes up somewhere else. But that was very helpful for me. So during that time, I think that the OCD bubble became Edgar, and that worked for me.
Yeah, and I appreciate you naming that, because not every analogy is going to resonate with each person. And yeah, some people find it helpful to personify their OCD and kind of externalize it outside of themselves, like through that metaphor of thinking about OCD as like another part of ourselves, or even like another person outside of ourselves.
Yeah. I'm looking at time, Alex, and we probably need to wrap up. Is there anything else that we want to talk about and do? Have we spoken about everything around OCD that feels relevant, or do we want to do a third part on OCD? What do you think?
I just want to share two more therapies real quick before we wrap up. So acceptance and commitment therapy is for specifically like for OCD, which is like, from my understanding, is like a separate training that a therapist would take. Was another like evidence-based therapy for OCD. And then there's supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions, or SPACE for short. And this is a therapy that's geared towards parents and helping parents understand anxiety in their child, which can include OCD. And the therapist works with the parents primarily in managing OCD. So I will say that if you're looking for an OCD specialist to either get assessed or to work on your OCD, don't be afraid to ask them like what their training is, because my first therapist I worked with said that I don't even think I worked with them, because I think at this point I kind of knew a little bit about like what to look for, but they listed OCD as one of their areas of treatment. And then when I asked them if they used ERP, they're like, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, okay, I don't think you actually are specialized in this. I think you're just ticking boxes to try and get more people. And so standard talk therapy can actually be really harmful for OCD. And so this is why it's especially important to work with someone that's trained. And there are some like self-help kind of programs out there. And there's like different resources, which we'll put in the show notes too. But Jenna Overbaugh is a therapist that has kind of like a self-guided like OCD. I think she calls it the OCD blueprint. There's like self-guided ICBT courses out there. Yeah, I'm going to be running a coaching program for folks that are wanting to get out of kind of thought loops, kind of using some skills from ICBT. And so, right, there's different like programs that maybe aren't therapy led, or maybe the therapist does lead it, but they're not your therapist. They're operating under a different capacity, like a coach or something. And there's books and stuff. And I think, yeah, some people will read the ICBT book as like a therapy participant if they can't find a therapist or can't afford therapy. Yeah, so there's all kinds of resources out there.
Sounds good. Anything else about OCD before we wrap up?
Not that I can think of. Is there anything you want to share before and we can always circle back if need be, but
Of course. I do want to check in. How's your energy now that we've recorded?
I do feel a little more energized, but
Okay.
also still tired.
Yeah.
So,
I hear
like,
ya.
maybe I regained 1 spoon.
Okay.
How's your energy level?
It was nice to be connected. I've been feeling disconnected but tired, and I can't think of the word when you sort of don't care, ambivalent about connection.
Mm-hmm.
So I think often for me, having things that are planned allows me to show up when I wouldn't want to because of my sense of showing up for an obligation works for me more often than not.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I think ambivalence is probably one of my biggest defense mechanisms. I don't care. Doesn't matter.
It's good to recognize it.
Yeah. Alex, where can people find you and what do you have going on these days?
So people can find me for therapy at the divergentgrowtherapy.com. I offer assessments for autism, ADHD, and I offer therapy. And also I can do OCD assessments for people on Wapakoti land, colonized as Minnesota. And then my coaching program is the Divergent Grove Unlearning Collaborative. And I believe the website is Divergent Grove unlearningcollaborative.com. I'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, like I mentioned, I've got some thought loop coaching, some kind of, I forget what I named everything, but just different types of coaching for like late diagnosis, for getting out of thought loops, things like that. And then also I offer training and consulting through that, the second business. How about you?
Just a question for clarification for me. For therapy, can anybody in the state of Minnesota see you? Or is it just on the Wapakoti land?
Wapakoti land is colonized as Minnesota.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm very, as you, the listener may not know, that my geography is incredibly, incredibly poor. That is not one of my strong suits. And for coaching, anybody in the world can work with you.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Good question.
All right. Sounds good. I can be found at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I've got this podcast and another podcast called Unapologetically Sensitive. I work with a lot of late diagnosed neurodivergent folks. I love working on boundaries and communication, parenting. I'm drawing a blank. That's all I have in my, I guess I am more tired than I am. I thought I was. And if you have any questions and want to reach out to us, you can reach out to us at unapologetically ADHD at gmail.com. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Anything else, Alex?
Oh, thanks so much for listening.
Say goodnight, Alex.
Good night, Alex. Wait.
Have a great evening, everybody. Bye. Thanks for spending time with us in this space where your too muchness is never too much. Remember, you're not broken and you're definitely not alone. We're here to honor the complexity, celebrate the nuance, and walk this neurodivergent path together.
You might consider giving us a rating and a review on the platform you listen to podcasts. It gives others an opportunity to see our podcast and walk this path with us. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind to your nervous system, and stay unapologetically ADHD. You belong here.